All right. Hello, everyone. We are back. It's been a long time, a hot minute. It's good to be back, and this time we brought some friends along, some very special guests. And so my name is Gift, as you all know, and this is my friend and co-host, Aimee.
Great to be back. It's been too long. It's been far too long. And we're really thrilled to have our special guests here tonight. So folks, they're going to introduce themselves, but first I want to just thank everybody for taking the time to talk with us today and to dream and discuss and lay down some business about the theme of movement. So we have Barak Soleil, who's joining us from Chicago. We have Karine-Myrgianie Jean-François, who's also joining us from Montreal, also known as Tshuma, traditional Mohawk territory. And we have Leroy Moore, who is joining us from New York, right, Leroy?
No, Berkeley, California.
Berkeley. Oh, okay, that's on the other side of the continent. Leroy Moore from Berkeley, California. Thanks, everybody. So, Kevin, do you want to introduce yourself first? I mean, we connected just recently over the fact that we had some crossover in some women's studies courses together. So, full nerd alert over here. But yeah,
Yeah.
You know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, that was a really long time ago. But your name is when you have names that are not common, it's easy to remember people. But yeah, my name is Karine-Myrgianie Jean-François. I work currently at the Disabled Women's Network of Canada. I'm a queer, Black, fat femme who's also a student. That's how I identify. Someone who lives both mental and physical chronic issues. And I'm also someone who has dabbled a lot in writing. I keep writing, maybe not so much these days, and practicing art, whether it's playing the piano or singing. I don't quite identify as an artist yet, as a writer, yes. Although I have performed at our local Pride in Montreal. So I was born and raised in Tiohtià:ke in traditional Kainai territory. And I still live here to this day. And I'm very excited to have a chat with all of you tonight.
Awesome.
Fabulous. Thank you. Leroy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, a little bit. I'm Leroy Moore, born in the coldest place on earth. It's not the North Pole, it's Buffalo, New York. Got the hell out of there early and moved to Connecticut, grew up in Connecticut, New York in the 70s and 80s. Was an activist early on. And moved to California in '91. Here I started many organizations, disability advocates of minorities organizations for people of color back in the '90s. Then I joined Poor Magazine and still doing that. Sins Invalid, they helped start that with Patty Byrne, and that's still going on. And now it's Hip Hop Nation, and also the National Black Disability Coalition. I wrote 5 books so far, and yeah, that's me.
Casually, 5 books, just no. Love your books, man. Love your books. Thank you. And Barak, let those of us who don't know you know a little bit about yourself.
All right, hello. And I'll begin by also giving acknowledgement around land and acknowledgement of also the communities in Canada that have taught me around understanding acknowledgements around land. And as Aimee said, I reside currently in Chicago, which is on the ceded and unceded territories of the Council of Three Fires, among others. I'm going to acknowledge the Ojibwe and the Ottawa and the Potawatomi people among those. And really just in terms of being in Chicago on the unceded land, I'm looking to be as respectful of the land and the people in relationship to those who have come before us and the ongoing ways in which Indigenous people and in some parts of states referred to as Native people, the ways in which to continue to honor, acknowledge, and take care of the land. So I want to offer that. The other way I want to offer acknowledgement is in acknowledging that at a point in time that I've used the term CRIP acknowledgement, and I drew that term particularly from Leroy's use of the K in CRIP. So I want to give a shout out and acknowledge Leroy for also bringing in the politics of the K into CRIP, acknowledging that as we are in Crip Talk Corner or hashtag Crip Talk Corner, that there are ways in which we can be Crip and Crip identified politically, culturally, and otherwise. I acknowledge that also the C of CRIP is not just tied to a political identity, but also acknowledgement of being in a particular part of the world where there is Crip gang folk. And it is very real and tangible also in my legacy of my family. So I acknowledge all the Cripness, acknowledge that it is with all its complexities. I am a Black, queer, multiply disabled individual. I am large-bodied, fat, friendly, and loving of myself. I'm wearing a lilac, perhaps, sweatshirt, clear glasses, a salt and pepper beard, and a shaved head. I am in my apartment, which includes in the background some shelving unit with, I want to say, a figurine from Django that is prominently displayed. I've been a part of the contemporary arts scene for 30 years. It'll be actually 30 years officially next year in 2021. I've been part of the contemporary art scene and have first entered into understanding and engaging with Canadians, and actually Montreal. So that was my first experience actually getting to know Canada, and I can talk more about that later. Yes.
Wow.
Very memorable 10 days that I got to know you there, Barak. That was so cool. So Gift has some fabulous icebreakers since we know some of you know each other, but we kind of just wanted to have a little fun like beginning of our dinner party this evening. So
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I thought just like before we dive into our discussion, just like to get to know each other a little bit more in a casual way. So I just have a few icebreakers here that if you'd like, you could participate in. I am curious, who would be your dinner guest if you had to choose one?
can it be like historic or
Historic, there's no limit. It could even be a fictional character, anything. And why, of course.
I guess I can start. I mean, I'm gonna say someone, and then maybe in 5 minutes I'll be like, but why did I not say someone else? But I'm just gonna stick with one person for now, and that person I think is Audrey Lorde. Um, Audrey Lorde is someone that I would have loved to meet. Our lives are very different in lots of ways, but also very similar. Both our parents come from the Caribbean and immigrated. Well, hers to the U.S., my parents to Canada. But she's a person who has put in words the experience of being othered in so many spaces, whether as a lesbian, right? Whether as a person with a disability, whether as a Black person living in the US, but also in Mexico. That's also someone who's written about getting older. And the reason why I would love to meet her is not just because she wrote so amazing things that I relate to, and it's someone that reminds me at least weekly, if not daily, that self-care is important and that, we need to dismantle all the systems. But I would like to know, how does she do with happiness, right? How does she, because I feel I know a lot about her in the ways that she's told about us through Zami, through her poetry, through her essays. But there's something I would like to just be like, so how do you cook? And like, what kind of spices do you use? And what have you learned from being, living in so many spaces? But also, how do you find happiness in all those spaces that we're other, but also spaces that are also super important for us to be in? So Audrey is a person I would love to meet.
Awesome. Thank you.
I can go next. It's so hard to pick one. But I think Curtis Mayfield would be mine. I would love to talk to him about, how he dealt with his disability is so powerful, And his last album is just amazing, Yeah, and how he deal with his brother being disabled and, coming into disability politics when he became disabled. He took a total different route than Christopher Reeves, and he didn't take Pendergrass. I mean, he was like on it. It didn't take him years and years to become, politically active, or at least in his songs. Or I'd love to talk to him about that. Talk to him how he, was independent on the music industry way before the internet. It's like, how did he do that? He was just so out there. So yeah, I would love to interview him. I came close. I was talking to one of his sons, so Crip Hop did a remix of a couple of his songs. So we wanted to get that passed, and we never got it past the family. But yeah, I'd love to meet him.
I'm also going to say, I think this question is not just for the guests. So, Gift and Aimee, this question is also for you all, right?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
We're all in this Crypt Talk corner together, right?
We are.
All right. So, some first had to begin by acknowledging that the first person to come to mind is my mother, who would be alive then for me to have dinner with, who I would cook for, and reflect back to her the ways in which she has profoundly given me such gifts of love and life and understandings of intersectionality before it was coined a term, and ways of being that I think were also very crypt. and ultimately very queer affirming. So I would say that would be, of course, my first and foremost thought, because she'd be with me right now. Yeah, so, and I also want to acknowledge Audrey Lorde did come to my mind, so I so appreciate that. And I have to be honest, I don't have a one person, because I'm with multiple folks at the table. But particularly Octavia Butler would be a person I feel I would be extremely honored to be present with, and also to not ask for her to continue to have to produce anything, but just be. Like, I want to be like sipping tea with her, and again, cooking for her, and just being with her for a moment, just because what she put into the world is transformative ways of thinking and radically imagining the ways in which Black, and I'm gonna say Black, queer, crip, femme folks are being in the world, and how we're imagining and how we're moving to change. And so it would be Octavia Butler. And I have to say that I would then have to also have Harriet Tubman show up.
Yes,
yes. Like, this is like, I feel like that's the, like, to be honest, like Audrey Lorde, Harriet, and Octavia would be like the, like the triumvirate that would have to be. And I would just be like, that'd be it for me. I'd be done after that. So yes.
That would be one hell of a dinner.
Yeah.
What would you cook?
So I think at the moment that come to mind is that I have to cook something from the earth of greens. I have to honor my mother's pot liquor greens, made my way with some, I think that, and I would say I think that's where I would start off with, like, greens, because greens have been such a story and narrative that I have charted and carrying forward, and also a notion of I would have brought up the other thing I would have brought up with something probably some sort of, like, I have to say, okay, greens and probably some variation of fried chicken. Yes. Or honoring all the negritude.
Amazing.
That's amazing.
So I spent the last 5 months with my mom. And so my answer is like family based. I think I would invite my grandma on my mom's side, because I was close with her like when I was a kid, but I just find there's so many like connections in how my mom acts now, and then how I act when I'm with her, that I would like to like have a chance to talk with her as an adult. And I remember when I was, I don't know, maybe like in elementary school sometime, we had an assignment at school to interview a relative. And so it was like my first interview, I think, ever. And I interviewed her, and I found out all this stuff about her life. In World War II, she was British, and then she moved to Canada when World War II ended. And like, I don't know, I'm really interested in my history and learning my lineage and stuff. And it's important just like for knowing where I come from, but also knowing like how I relate to where I live, and the different like ways that my personal history has been impacted by who my ancestors are and stuff. So that's one side of it. And then she also had like extreme sass, and I feel like that's also something that's translated. So so I think it would be a blast to have dinner with her. and like joke around. And she definitely had like a feminist streak while being like, while keeping my grandpa like satisfied and happy and feeling like he was in charge. And I remember observing that and finding it like interesting how they interacted. And I find that I have a lot more, I guess, like, or maybe it's just an illusion, but I feel like I have more control over my life than she might have. And so to find out more about what that was like for her would be really cool. And that's it.
Nice. Wow, this is a hard question. I know, who came up with that? I have so many, but I think like one I'd really, really love to have dinner with would be Martin Luther King Jr. The reason being is because like I'm spiritual, I'm Christian as well, and I'm also heavily involved in activism. And I'd be really curious to learn how he was able to balance the pressures of the church and also the pressures of the activism community as well, because they tend not to always see eye to eye on certain movements. So I'll be really, really curious, like how he was able to navigate both of those worlds and also trying to keep unity at the same time. So that's, yeah, Martin Luther King Jr. for me. Yeah. All right. I think we're good, unless you guys have other questions that you're curious to ask Aimee and I. No, we're good.
So today we're talking about movement, and we all move through space, and then we also move people and ideas and our voices and all sorts of different things. And so we wanted to kind of open up by asking you, like, what comes to mind when you think of the word movement, or like, what do you picture, or what do you feel when you when we say movement? For me, it's like a few different things, like just like wheeling around really fast gives me a lot of joy. And then also feeling like I don't necessarily like the word in relation to like social movements, because I found that it can be quite like constricting, or there can be like a lot of pressure associated with it. So I think of it more in terms of like freedom of mobility and that sort of thing. Yeah, love to hear what you think.
I think for me, when I hear movement, you know, being an artist slash activist, of course, I think about, you know, activists, movements that changed the world, that changed politics, that changed our way of living. And I also see movement as Black disabled dancers and shakers just move their bodies and just totally, change how the body is shaped. You know, I go back to the elder Jim Crow. A lot of people think that Jim Crow is only, you know, legal, but he was an elderly Black man dancing outside, you know, and that has stuck with me for so long, you know, is that, you know, he was dancing in his own community as a Black disabled elderly man. And yeah, and his movement was police. It's almost like today, here in Oakland, a Black man was arrested because he was dancing in the streets in East Oakland. Like, wow, nothing has changed, But, the dancing body, especially the dancing Black body is police, So yeah, so I see movements in an artistic way and as a way to shift politics and a way to shift our society.
You like dancing, Leroy?
Yeah, I like seeing it, I like reading it, I like the historical things about it. But the last time I went out dancing was a long time ago.
All right. So, I mean, movement is essence and being. I think of that within the context as a contemporary artist who has largely been a part of the dance scene for a while, recognizing I'm actually not at all as invested in the concept of dance, more so in the articulation of our bodies and these movements that are have been articulated by those who are not within the dance movement, because the dance movement has largely been articulated in this part of the world, specifically, is deeply ableist, deeply elitist, and not at all inclusive. So I was a part of that movement for a while, and it reminded me spiritually, emotionally, physically, that movement was never really built for my body. And that actually the ways in which I'd already been moving, when I was moving in community, when I was moving as a child, when I was moving, and social dances with my family, that was a movement that really was a thing that I drew upon. And then as I began to go deeper into looking at movement, recognizing it as, the articulation of oneself through space, and acknowledging and looking at and recognizing the details, the minutiae, the small movements that are actually quite powerful, and that allows every person the opportunity to move in their own being. Like that for me is movement. And so I look to those now. I look more to the act of me having now done things like ascent upstairs because I use a wheelchair, or things like that as movement that calls to mind how people need to be conscious and make apparent to things that are deeply problematic in our ways of navigating the world. And so I say that as one thing, and the other framing and in relationship to my work has largely been the reason why I first started to call my network of artists that I would develop projects with, called the Underbelly, is in reference to the underbelly of the slave ship. So I'm going to acknowledge a deep or profound movement that moved people that I know, and I know ancestrally, a part of me, is the migration of Black bodies through the Middle Passage as one of the greatest and most profound movements that has shaped this part of the world in relationship to Indigenous folk here. So in my work through the Underbelly, I'm constantly seeking to acknowledge how that movement continues to inform how I move and am moved by the ways of being in the world.
I mean, really, really resonating with what the way I see movement for me is the way I see water. It's the way I see waves. It's the way I see waterfalls. It's the way that like collectively we're stronger, and it might seem like tiny, tiny movements, tiny, like kind of drop of water. But if we all put those drops of water together on one thing, we actually make sculptures. And that's the way I see it, as someone who's been part of different movements, who's always never quite sure if I should be joining this one or that one, because like technically I fit within so many. And also someone who believes in the collective power of doing things. So a few years ago, I was part of people who started a queer and trans Black Indigenous people of color art festival in Montreal. And we did this because we were not seeing each other in, really corporate prides. We're not seeing each other in the ways that people of color communities, which are really centered around immigration, our migration kind of discourses, were also established as mostly second generation, third or fourth even generation people of color still living here, but always being told that we're not from here. And for me, the way I see it is that we came together, we ate together, and then we decided together we're going to go towards this point, and we're going to show that we existed. And maybe sometimes those movements create hurricanes and things that are not so pleasant, but sometimes they create beautiful things like waterfalls, like rainbows. And so for me, that's how I see movements. And I see that also our movements, and for me, it's very important that it's collective and not individual, because one person alone cannot necessarily be guided or leading something in one direction. But collectively, we do that. But also collectively, we have a better impact because we all have those different skills, right? Of dancing, of creating or feeding people, of, creating beautiful Excel task lists to make sure everything is going to be perfect. But also just, people were there to welcome and listen and make sure the space is safe, in so many different ways for, the varieties of us who are queer and trans and Black, Indigenous, and persons of color. So that's how I see movement.
Wow. Thank you all for sharing. It's amazing. The way I see movement is the means to reaching the destination, whatever that destination is. And the means for that could be through creative expression. It could be through protest. It could be through community gathering. And that's how I see movement. Or it could be even musical expression. The way music plays a part in you, whether it's like a healing process or it's a way to express the emotions. So that's how I perceive movement.
I just want to point out, and I know there's movement in Leroy's background, but I also want to acknowledge that we have an individual who's in the background that this is being recorded and will be broadcast. If Leroy, if your nephews are aware that they may be broadcast, and we have their permission, because I would not want my body to necessarily be somewhere on someone's virtual space, and I don't know that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, they know.
Okay, thank you. I just want to, and I so appreciate the conversation on movement, and that stillness is also movement. Just say stillness is movement, recognizing that we sometimes think of movement as a particular thing or a particular way of like a kinetic thing that is a particular way of like looking and perceiving it, but stillness is movement. Stillness is choice of movement. Stillness and the ways in which activists have profoundly held their bodies in space is a movement. Disabled bodies saying actually rest is a movement. Resisting a notion we have to be in some sort of productive mode or having to move in a particular way. That for me, I think is one of the most profound movements. is when we are able to allow ourselves to not think that we have to be caught up in the kinetics of life or in the kinetics of ableist a way of being, that we actually take a moment to hold still and be. I think that for me is really a profound movement. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there because thinking movement is kind of happening a certain way, but actually going, this moment, right, of stillness is actually a profound way of thinking about movement as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, existing is resisting, right? Especially as marginalized bodies, as marginalized people, as marginalized minds. Just the fact that we're alive and we're staying alive is like, it is maybe still in a lot of ways, but it's actually resisting, and resisting is movement. Staying alive, being like, this is who I am, all of those things makes us and makes the world around us move in ways that I think sometimes we don't realize, but are very important. And yes, I love the nap ministry, which is a thing that is a very popular Instagram and Twitter account, which really recommends rest and napping as ways of healing our bodies and our minds.
Interesting what you said about like us resting or staying still, and then that requiring the world around us to move in a certain way. Like, I don't know, that really resonates for me. Even I guess I'm less aware of like how I'm perceived now because I just like pay less attention to it, but it's definitely something that, even just going to a spot with a few people who use mobility aids or like has a service dog or something, like it's a thing. It's like an event, and like even the act of gathering is like it's a mobilization in a way, and even just the process of like getting where we want to meet and to be in the same space as each other, especially now, is like an undertaking,
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm curious as to how does movement play into your daily lives personally?
Yes.
I could start. It's like everything. Like I dance in the morning, and then I do other stuff, usually on the computer. And then like my day is spaced out based on like when I'm gonna go outside and wheel around or else walk around. And sometimes it's like frustrating how much of a consideration it is. In the summer less so, but like we were talking about the winter before we started recording, and at that point it's a huge preoccupation. So those are like the really practical ways. And then like I want to make people like move the way they think, mostly. Like that's like my big goal, myself included. So often I'm just like playing with words and moving them around too to see what they do for me, and then testing them out on other people and like seeing how they move people to think or feel things too. So yeah, it's everything pretty much. No big deal.
I really like what you said there, Aimee, about like how movement is like you view it as how people think. Like for example, with my case, I'm an artist. For some of you, I sing and I write music. I write songs, and I very much have a creative mindset. And I wake up listening to music. I go to bed listening to music, and when I'm experiencing intense emotions, whether it's sadness or happiness, I turn into music. I write as I'm feeling, as I'm going through that feeling. And something that's really interesting is when I have a weird dream and I'm singing, I actually wake up and start singing the song out loud so that I don't forget it in the morning, so that I can record it quickly on my phone. So yeah, even in my most relaxed state, uh, my creative, my musical creative side is still moving, um, and yeah.
And I think we don't think about a creative, like our creative minds as being like something that is part of our movement. I feel like I think of myself as movement, and it's really interesting. The confinement and pandemic has made me a lot more aware of the movement I get or do not get in my personal life. I'm not someone who's necessarily super active all the time, but I used to be able to walk to work and, you know, go around on my bike and things like that. And these days it's a little more complex because I work from home, which means I go between my bedroom and my living room, basically. So like going out for walks or just going on my balcony to smell the fresh air has been really important to me. Also thinking about different ways of like using my brain in some ways. So like doing those silly games on my phone, like 2048 with numbers. I actually spent Friday night and Saturday night doing online Jeopardy with a bunch of nerds in French from across the like mostly Montreal, Quebec, but also people in the U.S. who are from Quebec. So just like different ways of using my brain and different ways of, you know, making sure that there's movement in the ways that I think as well. So, following new people on Instagram and on Twitter, being made aware of different things, thinking about myself and my role in the society that we live in, taking the time to adorn myself, which is very important as part of my femme practice, intentional femininity practice, things like that. So like that's a little bit of what the movement is, and doing a lot of stretches, especially when you spend, I find for myself, because I spend so much time sitting in this chair, and it's really important for me to stretch and to realize that there's muscles like I haven't used in so long. And doing some light ballet sometimes in front of my computer and that kind of thing. And just being intentional about what have I done myself? What have I done for my body? Like, have I cooked? I've had a little dance party in front of my computer with like good music. Have I just, sat and done nothing? So like, let's think of ways to like stretch my mind, my brain, my bodies in ways that feels good. And sometimes just to take a nap, because sometimes it's also what I need.
Yeah, I see. My work is I'm always pushing, so it's movement. I'm always pushing to, I don't say the next level, or to something that's new. This last couple of months, hip hop has been pushing constantly. Now it's the things that are coming back, being on a national newspaper and reaching out to hip hop members in Africa and building there, and there's a new chapter in Wales, and so I consider that movement. I consider that me pushing that to come. So that's movement to me. Physically I ride my bike, like Karen was saying, my office is in my living room. So I go to my bed and get up and go to my living room. So I had to remind myself that I have a bike. I can take a ride. So yeah. So I think most of what I think about movement is getting people together and pushing what I want to see out there for the world. So I consider that movement. Yeah.
Leroy, I feel like I've seen your bike in person because I've seen it in photos and I love it so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Attractive set of wheels, my friend.
It's my car, really. I mean, yeah.
But I like what you said about like movement being about gathering people or bringing people together too. That resonates for sure. Mm-hmm.
And I would say like something that I find, and maybe I don't know about the US context, but I'm sure it's not that different from Canada, is that I've noticed, I think, and I've noticed, and I think we know collectively that the most of the Black people who have been killed by the police are actually people with disabilities, whether it's mental health, autism related. And yet we never hear disability organizations talking about how race is actually an important factor. And also are not necessarily like, being part or co-conspirators of like movements like Black Lives Matter. And something I've been trying to do in some small ways through my work is to make sure that, we advocate in that kind of situations, not just because it's happening in the US, because it's also happening here. There's been so many cases of Black and Indigenous persons with mental health or on the autism spectrum who have been killed by the different police corps across the country. We have a really good idea about Ontario. We have some good numbers. Like we know what's happening a little bit in Manitoba and the Maritimes. Other places, it's not so clear. And at the same time, I find that's also part of movement, right? It's also to just, collectively make sure that, how do we become co-conspirators? How do we make sure that we elevate the voices and experiences of the people that often we forget in our own movements? And so for me, that's also something I'm trying to do, but it's also very hard because, there's a good kind of disabled people, middle class, white, listens, respectable. And then there's the other people, the ones that people often don't care about. So I would say that's also something that around movement that I think is important. Like for me, is important in my day-to-day, and not just in a work context, but also in a personal context of making sure what I can do to support people within my own communities who are more marginalized, but also how can I become a co-conspirator for other people.
Yes. I think in the context of thinking about the movement as part of the everyday, recognizing that it is in this particular moment heightened perhaps, but consistent, that the movement I think about, the movement that is about police and they're moving against certain bodies. And so I recognize that even as perhaps there is a siren in my background because of where I'm located. So I'm reminded of the presence. Consistently, where I live, I am reminded of the presence of policing of our bodies, which for me calls into question how I move through my everyday life. It is always present. So I think about that. I'm reminded, and I was going to bring up that there is sonic evidence or sonic ways of thinking that we are in movement. When I wake up, I'm in a movement, and or because my window's open, I'm reminded of the movement of people. I'm reminded of the movement of cars. I'm reminded of the movement of police. I'm reminded of the movement of bodies that have been injured moving through space. That is so sonically, that is what I'm drawn into in the everyday in terms of the notion of movement, that there are others moving, even as I might be resting, that the siren is happening and is a place of like perhaps triggering alarms or potential death or potential states of precarity. I am not in that same movement as those who are existing in that movement. So these things collide and they push against each other and they're juxtaposed. So I think of my movement as never being one of myself moving necessarily through space, but of the ways in which movement shows up is evident in my ways of being in my apartment. I am in a neighborhood that has been impacted by looting. It is literally, there was a particular incident that occurred which caused a movement that actually occurred, and this is happening at like, I think 3 a.m. or something. I didn't know it was happening, but all of a sudden there was certain loud voices, which was about people who actually had transitioned from one part of downtown Chicago to another, who passed down my block to loot the Walgreens pharmacy, which is right almost not even about 100 feet from where I am. So I am evidence of the movement of those folks, not knowing that happened, only to find next day that that's what occurred. The movement that occurred from someone doing something in a part of Chicago, not far from where I live, police then shooting this individual, which then created a movement, that not necessarily the right kind of movement, because someone then said, oh, they shot a child. So then that caused a movement from the south side, where mostly Black people are, to the north side, to the more of, to, you know, where the Macy's and the Bloomingdale's, to all those stores, they moved down to that area and then began looting. That's the movement that I recognize that is a part currently of my everyday sensation. I have to acknowledge those movements more so even in my own way of moving, you know, and to counter that, yes, I meditate, you know, I listen to my music, but I think in terms of, you know, Gift, we talked about the everyday, that right now is the everyday. That is what I'm existing in. I'm existing in those movements and the residue of those movements. And I will be remiss to not also say that, you know, in the pedestrian act of going to a bus, going down the street, and living in Minneapolis, I must remark that the movement that I remember when George Floyd was murdered is that I know that block, I know that bus shelter. When I lived in Minneapolis, I moved through those spaces. As a young Black male, I moved through those spaces. About 3 blocks down from where George Floyd was murdered was where Pillsbury House is, where a group of young Black males between the ages of 18 and 25 created a residency, actually did a lot of performative acts outside and running around. I can only imagine, as I think about that time in history in the 90s, what that would have been like to juxtapose that when the moment within 3 blocks that this Black man was murdered and placed and imposed upon movement. I think about the collision of those movements in time and history. That's what I sense and think about. My everyday action in the 90s of going past that same bus shelter down that street is now collided with the image and cessation of movement, or the lack of movement that was imposed upon when police did their movement and killing and landing a person that they never should have touched, landing them beneath the earth. So that's what I think about right now in the everyday notion of movement.
Will it be a part of some dancing or interventions that you are dreaming up?
I think right now, I would say my rest and resistance is actually the intervention. Right now, I did one video that showing myself in a place of rest is actually resistance and counter to the ways in which Black bodies, as Black, particularly at this moment, particularly Black bodies, in the moment of how they're dealt with and how they've been presenting in movements against them, that actually right now, that is my intervention. I don't know, I will say this much. I don't know if I want to carry that movement, carry the movement of those bodies in that way. In this moment, there have been time when I would have tried to recreate or done something, but I feel like in this moment, as you know, was brought up, Karine brought up NAP ministry. I think my movement right now is rest. My movement right now is that resistance. My movement right now is to counter the ways in which Black and brown and indigenous bodies have been, like pushed in media, perpetually seen in certain ways. I think that's the movement for me right now, actually, to not recreate or to intervene in that regard. I think that's what I would say is probably what has been my response, and to build a culture of care that actively seeks to dismantle these pernicious movements against our bodies. I think that's what I want to build. If there's a movement right now I'll be building and interested in cultivating, it's a culture of care.
That's beautiful. It's one of those things that, like, we've talked about tiny little movements, micro movements, and then, the sonic side of it, like hearing people moving through space outside your window. And I'd love to know about, like, the little tiny movements that are parts of your worlds right now. Like, I mean, when I think about, like, a culture of care, it could be checking up on a friend. I mean, Gift and I were calling each other, like, every day earlier on in the pandemic. We were just like, hey buddy, like, what are you having for lunch? And, like, that was so enriching for me, So, like, what are some of those little things that you're up to these days?
And you don't forget to mention that we also had dance parties.
Yes, of course. I mean, that goes without saying. This is like a FaceTime lunch. Yeah. Leroy, you've got some family over these days. Is that part of that for you?
Yeah. Taking this time to really be with family and stuff. But I think my whole life has been creating my own mirror, my own, groups of people, and I think that's my whole life's work. A couple of years ago, created what's called Black Men Talk. Is 3, 4 of us, and we just pick a topic once a month, and we talk about it on YouTube. That's a community has enriched me. So doing these little movements has always been a part of what I do. You know, I think everything that we do as humans start as little. You know, I know when me and Patty Burns started Sins and Ballet, it was just in our house. Now it's a national thing. So yeah. So at this time, just continuing with my work and making sure that I outreach to people more. I was just talking to a couple of Black disabled people in the UK a couple months ago. He talked about the whole history of that movement. So yeah, I think the hard part is staying in contact. Because our lives do get busy all the time, but making sure that we stay in contact. Yeah.
Something I've done, I love to bake a lot. And at the beginning of the pandemic, some friends around me, it was their birthday, my sister as well, and I couldn't, we couldn't really celebrate except doing a thing on the internet. But I think that cake is very important in life, and so I've baked cakes for people. I've baked cupcakes, and then I drop it off in front of their house, or we find a way to pick it up without contact or that kind of thing. So for me, that's a small way of being like, hey, I care. And also here's something delicious that maybe will bring you some happiness, if not happiness, at least some butter and sugar and gluten. But I would say something else that is for me the small movement is also to just be maybe more open that I usually am around mental health. A lot of people around me have been struggling a lot with their mental health, and I'm part of those people. Mental health is really hard in isolation for me, and that's the life I still live. I know some people are more deconfined than I am, but it's also to be more open and to also talk with people about strategies that I've tried, and some of them may not have worked for me, but I've worked for other people that I know, and encouraging people to seek therapy, find resources that might be useful for them, because there's been a few deaths, and not the, there's never really fun deaths, but really hard deaths for a lot of people. People in their 30s and early 40s that were not sick. And so that's been really hard for people around them as well to deal with that. And just to think about how can we do this, sharing little tips about plants, for example, with people, because sometimes if you care about your plants, that means that you're also caring about another, not quite a human being, but when you're living alone in your apartment, it is something that will keep you, wanting to get up every morning and be like, okay, where are you at? How are you doing? What do you need? And something that actually helps people around mental health or things like that, and really reminding people that, we're just trying to live, and sharing, things like pleasure activism. Read this book says that for every chapter you read, you should masturbate before or after. I don't remember. So I was like, read a chapter. She'll tell you to masturbate. I think that might be a good thing for you, or not. Some people are not into that, and so those are the kind of thing that for small gesture, right? Of checking in on my friends. Also, we're far away, right? And that's the magic of the internet. I can't imagine if we had lived this in the 1920 or 1950s. There are ways we have of communicating and being present in other people's lives that is possible now that was not possible before. And I think part of it is also the incredible work that's been done around disability justice and mutual aid, for example, is also something that I've been trying to incorporate, right? Especially for people in my neighborhood. As someone who can go to stores, and go grocery shopping for other people as well and deliver. So.
So I guess a small movement and for myself probably is plant care and plant and just tuning into the movement of plants um, in their own time as, you know, kind of disruption to notion they have to move in a certain way. I have exponentially now collected plants. So I see that's what's happening for me and my kind of like in the kind of internal ecology that I feel is like sustaining me in this moment is 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 just like being with the plants and like yeah and tending to them, and I know that and as I'm tending to them I know they are tending to me because I'm taking the time to be with them. So I would say that. I would say the other thing is showing up is that I am when I navigate spaces that are not my own and particular spaces that I'm supposed to like check out, like I'm supposed to check out a particular remote office space to work in. I remind people who don't know, abled folk, I remind them of the small things that impact whether or not I will feel like I am in an accessible environment. Um, the weight of a door, the amount of doors, I had to remind them and bring into consciousness to the conscious around the fact that how they easily feel they can move through these spaces. And then they go, oh, come and please check this out. And this space is so accessible. And then the door is too heavy. I'm reminding them their ease of movement and the privilege of their ease of movement through the space, or the push or the lack of push button and or the weight of a door and or. So I think that's one of the things I I think I do now all the time. Every time I become the person who looks at the movement of things, or the lack of, because of how I can navigate. So I think that's something small that I've done. Also, it just keeps me, it kind of keeps you kind of like, I feel like I am, what is it, kind of in the practice of further articulating and nuancing and offering complexity to able folks, well-intentioned, but oftentimes not nuanced, complex way of thinking about accessibility. Like, I think that is what I do. I think I'm just there going, wait a minute, and I think that's one of the things I do. And it does bring me a little bit of like joy in that moment. Just feel, oh, really? So I think of that. And I have to say, the last thing I would say, I know you're talking about small movements. I'm reminded, and I have to say that the reason I met Aimee and the reason and happened in Montreal, that movement that we did, which was supposedly, for me, honestly, I do not consider myself an activist. I consider myself very much involved in the cultural movement. But the movement we did in Montreal, and what we did within that moment has forever changed me, and it's brought me to getting to know folks I appreciated. Aimee is one of those, and I would say, and I know Aimee doesn't recognize this, but I recognize it was the movement we did at La Sal Rosa, and then essentially like that was like, okay, we did it for the people. It was the actual first kind of meetings that folks who were not part of this conference, when they showed up, when in Montreal, this folks just showed up and Aimee showed up and just like hung with us. That was, for me, the most profound part of the movement, was just being in reflection with folks who kind of just knew about what it meant to constantly try and navigate spaces that were not built for you. And so I would say that for me is, perhaps some consider that a micro or small movement, but that for me shifted and changed really the ways in which I am now attending to and engage and creating space for not just my body, for other bodies. to always feel welcome and feel like they can engage and navigate in the ways that their bodies want to move. So I just want to do a little shout out there for that.
Yeah, those like hangouts / strategy moments were extremely memorable for me too. And they kind of guide like what I look for with Crip folk and friends, because it's like there's an understanding that it doesn't have to be said that's extremely healing and pleasant and enjoyable. And so love that. That was, as it was very important moment for me too.
Wow. This has honestly been such an amazing conversation. I wish like we had the entire night to talk, because this has been quite magical, and just to be within the same space with all of you folks has been really like encouraging and just so nice. And yeah, I just want to say I appreciate you all, and I appreciate the work that you do, and I hope that we continue these conversations, we continue these movements beyond this this Crip Talk Corner podcast. And yeah, just want to say thanks. And like before we let you go, I'm just curious in terms of what would be your ideal gathering or performance look like. How would your ideal gathering or performance look like to you, just briefly?
I'll echo what Barak said, right? It's like this idea of coming together and hanging out. Often people see movements and see the big things as like, we do a protest, we go talk to politicians, but really the things for me that had the most impact personally, and I feel collectively in some ways, has been the moment where we gather to have food, to share tea, to drink water, to, coffee, whatever, right? Whatever food, whatever, like the drinks and the food is not necessarily the most important thing, but it's just like sitting down and sharing a meal, and it's sitting down and sharing our lives and our experiences, because we might all be X or Y, but our experiences are not the same, because we're also and and it's also how we better understand the world, and how we're able, like together, collectively, but also individually, to make changes in the world, so it's a better world for everyone. So for me, that's my favorite kind of gatherings, with a lot of unstructured time, so you have time to get into conversations, and not just like, being talked at for hours, which sometimes I feel lots of conferences I go to are just like, I sit and then people talk at me for an hour, and they're like, in 50 minutes, do you have any questions for like a room of 500? And you're like, well, I would like to engage with this, but there's no time, right? And for me, that's where I feel like I learn, especially as someone who's, in a lot of ways privileged in the disability community, as well as in the queer community, as a cis woman, as someone, who's physically able in lots of ways. It's important for me to also make sure that when I do get to talk to important people, whatever that means, that I'm able to convey the experiences of people who may not be around a table at the moment, but knowing that I'm usually the only person who's not white around those tables, the only person who does not identify as being, abled, mind, and, minded. So, it's like those things as well of like, I feel, and that's also how it's better to build our communities. And that's how we do better actions collectively.
I would say yes to what was just offered. The movement for me must be intersectional. It must center us. It must be deeply queer. It must be rooted in ways of being that are disruptive to ables. That is a movement I look for. Uh, and and accessible to folks from various disability communities and deaf communities. I feel like part of our movement must be conscious raising within ourselves to say we must always have captioning, audio description, ASL interpretation, all the things. We must offer those complexities to the movement. So I say the movement is a degree of consciousness. But I am reminded of the thinking around the performance I thought of, which was it could happen anywhere, but perhaps I returned back to Montreal some degree. Would be a movement of all wheelchair users, scooters, rollers, all of us at one end of Montreal, just moving across Montreal as one. However long it took, just moving along all together until we reach the end of the city.
Oof.
Yes.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful. I think just to build on what has been done, when a couple months ago when QueerPod did that online concert benefit, it was just amazing to see our culture, international, Brazil, Africa, US. It just blew me away. It's like that's the kind of environment that I want to be in 24/7. And I know we are all creating it, but to see it and to know it's there and to know that it's building without you is just beautiful. And I see it constantly, with Barak's work and other people's work. And I just want to have that huge accessible stage and just take over the UN. It's like, okay, we're here now. Get rid of all these politicians, all these other people, and just have that huge, get together, and not only for us living, but also inviting our disabled ancestors to play with us. When I wrote the book Black Disabled Ancestors, that whole year, the ancestors was just waking me up and saying, all right, you gotta write this book, you gotta get it going. And I was like, okay. And it's interesting because after the book was done, they left. I was like, where are you guys? So, having a space where we continue to work and we can also talk to our ancestors at the same time and bring their stories to the stage, to the screen, to whatever.
Have a
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so speechless. um, yeah, for me, my ideal gathering would be sharing food together on a regular basis, because I find a lot of comfort in food. And also like engaging, whether it's like in the output or the receiving of like creativity, whether it's in dance, art, or singing, or writing. Yeah, that would be my ideal gathering. That's how it would look like. And yeah. So thank you all so much for joining us. And Aimee and I, at the end, we like to do kind of like a call and response. And if you'd like, would like you to join us in this call and response. So when I say Crip Talk, you say corner, Crip Talk.
corner.
Crip Talk.
Corner.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, and everyone else, thank you for watching. We will see you next time. We don't know. You know how we do with Crip Talk. We'll let you know whenever the next episode is. And much love, much blessings to you all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.